Welcome back to this week's Leading Thinker in Video Interview series, where actually I'm inviting Emily onto the show, and she's going to talk about a really hot topic at the moment, and that's around IR35. But before we dive into that, Emily, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, so my name is Emily. I'm a business partnership manager from ICS Accounting. So we are a firm of accountants that provide an umbrella solution and also business accounting, and we are FCSA accredited members.
And it's really interesting because we've actually known ICS as a business for a few years. They're one of the firms that we partner with when we're supporting our contractors or temporary payroll workers. And I've got to know them so well over the years, and I've seen all the content that you're putting out there about IR35, and I thought, do you know what, we need to discuss this on the channel because it's so hot. It's, you know, it's coming in soon. It's April, isn't it, this year?
Yes.
That it's taken effect from. And obviously, I think, what has it been? It's been around since about 2000, hasn't it?
Yeah, the year 2000 it came in, that's right.
And first hit public sector, didn't it, a few years ago?
It did, yes. In 2017, it was the public sector reform. So they're kind of been there, done that, and now it's the private sector's turn.
So we need to learn a lot from the public sector and how they've handled it, don't we, really?
Definitely.
So yeah, now it's the private sector's turn. And I think that's why I wanted to invite you on, because it's quite a complex subject, I think. And I certainly couldn't sit here and advise all our partners at this moment in time about it. So I'm going to learn a lot from this as well, I think.
Good.
So shall we dive in? So
yes.
I was thinking, for the people like me out there, or other business owners or contractors, and the end client, so to speak, can you explain like what IR35 is, and perhaps the difference between those two terms, inside IR35 and outside IR35? Would that be okay to kick off?
Yes, no problem at all. So obviously, as you mentioned just before, IR35 actually came into force in the year 2000, and that was with the Finance Act. So its main purpose is to determine if contractors are actually disguised employees. Right. So should they be contractors, or should they, you know, actually be employees, but they're kind of just slipping under the net, if that makes sense. So the legislation that's coming in this year, April 2021, moves the liability from the limited company, which it currently sits with, to the end client or the fee payer.
Okay, so in layman terms, then, the end client could be it could be the recruitment agency.
Yes.
Or it could be the business that's actually hiring them and
who the contractor is actually going to work for every day. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, right, okay. And I think that's a clear distinction, isn't it? You've got to understand who that is.
Definitely.
Would that depend upon whether the contractor is going with them directly, or obviously through a third party, like say myself?
Absolutely, yeah, that's right. And obviously, like, who's paying the fee, who ultimately is at the end of the supply chain.
Yeah, the supply chain. I think that's going to be a key word to understand,
yes,
as to where the
that's right.
Okay, and then that inside and outside, what determines that?
So the factors that determine IR35 are supervision. So is a contractor supervised within their role? Okay. Direction, is someone telling the contractor what to do within their role? And control, so can someone move the contractor or give them extra work? So if a contractor is deemed to be under supervision, direction and control, they would be inside of IR35. Right. Therefore liable to being taxed and treated as if they were a pay-as-you-earn employee. If they were outside of IR35, they wouldn't be being supervised, directed or controlled, and would therefore be compliantly able to work through a limited company.
Right, okay, so that's quite clear then, isn't it, in terms of actually the distinction between them? And I'd read probably a little bit more into that, thinking it might be more complex.
Yeah,
it's actually quite simple, isn't it?
It just boils down to supervision, direction and control. Those three factors can determine whether a contractor is inside or outside.
So then if we talk about, say, from a business or an agency perspective, really, how can you avoid being non-compliant?
So obviously remaining compliant is so important. It's helpful for agencies to work closely with the clients to obviously make sure that both parties really understand and are clear on how they should be working. Obviously, working with an FCSA provider is another great example of how you can remain compliant, because FCSA have to audit every company that they work with on a yearly basis to make sure that everything that they're providing is correct, and everything they're relaying back to the contractors, and the deductions that they're making on a monthly or weekly basis, however it may be. Yeah, really it falls back to just keeping up to speed with all the legislations and making sure that you're fully understanding how everything works, which obviously partnering up with an umbrella company can massively help with.
Yeah, I can see that. I think that's why I'm glad we kind of work alongside a couple of businesses like yourself that can really give us that guidance and support, because you know, you're the specialist in the area. I guess it's a little bit like one of my clients coming to me for a piece of recruitment and finance. That's my background. I know it, you know, whereas we need to put our trust in you guys, don't we, to give us that education around the subject, really. I'm sure there's many of our clients that actually don't understand the implications, you know. So yeah, I think that really helps. What do you, you know, in terms of, like, I've read about this term called reasonable care.
Yes.
What does that mean? What, you know, who does the ownership fall upon for reasonable care?
Yes, so obviously that's again goes back to the supply chain. Right. So everyone in the supply chain needs to show that they've, you know, taken reasonable care to try and make sure that everything is as it should be, if that makes sense. So obviously an agency can show reasonable care by speaking with their end client, you know, finding out maybe if they've started doing any role assessments, if they've got a plan in place for how they plan on working, obviously when the reform comes in. It's obviously then the contractor needs to be thinking, oh, right, okay, maybe I'll double check with the agency to see what my determination is, if I'm inside or outside. A number of agencies we've spoken with recently have used our role assessment, even though it doesn't really sit with them. It could be the end client that would have to do that, but they're kind of forward thinking. So they've gone through a role assessment on a couple of roles, on a couple of the contractors' roles, and then they've relayed this information back to the end client to kind of say, not sure if you've had a chance to review this role yet, but I've had a look and I think it might actually be outside or it might be inside. So that again shows reasonable care, that, you know, they're taking the time to look into it to make sure all parties in the supply chain are being compliant.
And I think there's an element, that's what we do anyway, isn't it, as a recruitment partner?
Yeah.
We perhaps not needed to in the past determine the IR35 status, but we've already gone through most of those questions, I would say, in terms of understanding the brief before we actually take it to a candidate to make sure they can achieve on the objectives. And I think, you know, from our perspective, all that's done by a telephone, video, or recorded on an email anyway. So definitely, it's just about piecing it all together, isn't it, to make sure.
You know, communication as well, even just keeping up to date with the contractor, keeping up to date with the end client, as long as everybody in the supply chain is kind of communicating with each other to make sure everyone is doing the job right, in all honesty.
And do you think there was, like, you know, was there a pinnacle moment when the government decided to introduce this? You know, do you think, has it come about because of something?
I don't know if it's just because there are so many contractors out there at the moment that really could be employed by the company that they're working for, and the government have thought, you know, this is another way for us to maybe get some more money back, or but there's a lot of contractors that really they should be employed, whereas they're on these massive contractor rates, but there's people alongside them that are employed by, you know, the company that are on maybe a massively reduced rate to them. So
yeah, there's always a disparity, isn't there? And I think over the last 12 months, for sure, I'm sure the government are trying to find ways of bringing some money back in.
They need it now more than ever, I think, don't they?
But you know, I think you're right. I've seen the contractor market over the last 14 years hugely increase, you know, in terms of the number of candidates that are on the market on contract rates. There's a huge disparity in the level that perhaps you would earn as a contractor doing the same role as a permanent employee, you know, and the benefits aren't always the same, are they? No, you know, the implications on tax and NI, they're not the same, are they? So, you know, it makes a huge amount of sense it's just a massive change, isn't it, for that marketplace?
It's a massive change for a lot of people, and obviously a lot of contractors that are now going to have to be deemed inside. This is all they've ever known since they've been contracting. You know, some people have been doing this for 20 years, so it's a massive change for a lot of people, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay, so if we bring it back to then, like, you know, I said earlier, recruitment agencies haven't had to think about this before, have they? We haven't, you know. So what can recruitment agencies do to help them prepare for this and help their contractors? What can we do?
Of course. Well, obviously, one of the most important things I'd say is kind of getting everything in place. You know, say maybe by February to have everything finalised, what you're going to be doing, how you're going to be doing things differently, because the last thing you want is to be running around like crazy the last 2 weeks of March trying to get everything in place. Another thing that can help is audits of the contractors. So obviously, you know, finding out how many contractors do they have that are going to need a determination, you know, maybe feed that back to the client. Again, speaking with umbrella companies is a good thing to do, obviously, because we'll be able to offer advice, answer any questions that you might have. And again, communication with the contractors. Obviously, really, it's the contractors that it's going to be directly affecting. So they're probably going to have more questions than anyone. So just kind of keeping in touch, as we mentioned before, with the end client and the contractor is really important. And then obviously, compliance, if they're unsure about anything, just speak with an FCSA provider. And that should, you know, maybe assist them. Obviously, it's a drastic change for a lot of people, so everyone is in the same situation, unfortunately. But yeah, anything they're unsure about, just refer back to an umbrella provider.
And I think, I'm sure you guys have perhaps introduced some new tools into the business that are supporting people through the transition. So I know obviously we're talking to you guys at the moment, but is partnering with a specialist firm like yourself is obviously, you know, it's quite clearly the best way to go. Can you help people down this process with anything that you've introduced to the business?
Yeah, of course. So we've introduced a couple of new things. So we've introduced something called ICS Switch. So this is basically something that allows the contractor to, so say if they were deemed inside in the role, this would allow them to keep their limited company running in the background. So we would step in as their accountant and also their umbrella solution. So completely compliant. So their limited company would be running in the background whilst they were working on an inside IR35 contract. So we would pay them through the umbrella, but keep the limited company ticking over. When this happened in 2017, obviously in the public sector, we found that at first a lot of agencies refused to engage with limited companies and said, no limited companies, everybody has to go through an umbrella or pay for it. And yes, but then a couple of months down the line, it started to come out more, oh, actually, that role can be outside, that role can be outside. So in a couple of months' time after April, if the same thing was to happen in the private sector, when people actually, you know, decided to look into the roles, that gives the contractor the chance to switch back to the limited company, because obviously closing down a limited company can be quite a lengthy process, and some people just don't want to close it down. So it gives them the chance to keep the limited company running, you know, if the chance that in a couple of months they can switch back to it. You know,
okay, that sounds like a great option.
Yeah, it's giving people, obviously we know it's a difficult time for a lot of people, so it's just giving people options on what they can do.
I think that's important, the option side, isn't it? I quite like the name of that tool as well. ICS Switch sounds quite nice. And is there anything else that you can help the contractors with, or agencies with at the minute?
Yeah, of course. So we've got an IR35 hub on our website. So this has got other videos on there. So we've got more in-depth videos for the contractors, the agencies, and the end clients. So obviously anything we've not covered in this video, those 3 other videos go into a bit more detail to answer any further questions. And we've also made a role assessment tool. So this is something we can send out to agencies, which obviously you would look at a contract and basically answer a set of questions, and it would then give you a determination. Obviously, if it is outside, we've partnered up with a company called Kudos, so they provide insurance. So if, say if you reviewed one of your roles and it was deemed outside and you thought, oh great, contractor's going to still be able to work limited, we could put you in touch with Kudos after doing our assessment. They would take you through a couple more questions just to kind of delve in deeper. And then they also can provide IR35 insurance. So say if, a year down the line, HMRC wanted to dispute that role was actually outside, you'd be covered, and the contractor, yourself and the contractor, would be covered with the insurance. Wow. Which is reassuring for a lot of people, because I think even if someone now picked up a role that was outside, they would still be wary, because the last thing obviously you want is HMRC getting in touch saying, that's not right, and you owe us £50,000. I don't think anybody wants to receive that type of letter, do they?
Well, I think obviously just the word HMRC scares people, doesn't it? And the thought of them knocking on your door asking for money in 12 months' time on a traditional contractor rate, that's going to be a sizable amount of money, isn't it? So I actually hadn't considered the need for maybe additional insurance. So that's interesting. So I think it's great that you just mentioned that, because I hadn't even considered that. And I love the idea of this IR35 hub. So I'll, for anyone listening who's interested and perhaps unsure and hasn't deciphered all this information yet, I'll pop it in the links when we send out the communication. So yeah, thank you. That's it's been really insightful. It's given me a lot to think about. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to sharing this with the network. So thank you so much for coming on and educating us on how to approach IR35, which